Morning, everybody. This is Wesley Hudson, Chairman of the Prosperity and Livability Committee. I'd like to call us to order. In council chambers this morning, we have Councilmember Monica Peters, Mayor Pro Tem, myself, Wesley Hudson, and Cyril Jefferson. Online, we have Michael Holmes joining us virtually. We have one item this morning, presentation by Yalik's African American Art and Cultural Center, and we're always happy to have Miss Phyllis Bridges in the room with us today. Look forward to your presentation. The floor is yours. Thank you, ma'am.
Thank you guys so much. Good morning.
Good morning.
I think fall is finally here. I've been waiting on it. I don't do well in the heat anymore. Oh. Perfect for short people. I come before you again to present another presentation for a culture center for the city of High Point. And we are looking at a different location, so we're coming with a different ask this time. So I'm gonna go through the PowerPoint quickly, just to give you a little bit of highlights of what was presented before, and we'll take it from there. So let's see. Is this on? Okay, thank you, sir. All righty. Of course, Yalik's African American Art and Culture Center, we're looking for it to be a state-of-the-art facility, very high-tech, interactive type exhibits. Our mission, vision, goals, and what do Yalik's mean, because I'm asked that all the time. Spirit of the community. Anywhere we build it in this city, it's going to enhance and add more spirit to our city. I love color, I love architect, I love design, that's my background. Again, state-of-the-art facility, the facility itself will be a piece of art. I'm going to come back to this slide in a few minutes, but just remember these images here.
Good. I'm sorry to interrupt, Ms. Phyllis. Jerron, am I able to see the presentation online? Am I able to see the PowerPoint?
I think it was on, if you go to, Michael, if you go to our agenda, you can click on it. There's a link on the agenda.
No, it's fine, Monica, I got it.
Oh, okay, sorry.
He can see it now.
You can see it now, Michael.
Yes, I have it, thank you.
Okay.
Thanks, sir.
All right, so we'll come back to this slide in a little bit. Of course, Yalik's will be educating, bringing awareness to High Point's African American history. We will go back as far back as 1850, at least 9 years before the city was even founded, to tell the story of African Americans in the city through visual arts, performing arts. We're looking to bring in local, regional, and national type events and programs. Again, we will go back to the early history of Black High Point, from the founding of the city on up to today, where we are still making history in our city. All our exhibits will be interactive, state-of-the-art, touchscreen. I don't do boring. I love excitement around everything that I do in educating and bringing awareness to the culture here in High Point. If someone would like to give us a huge donation, I am not turning down any monies from anybody. Your name could be on any wing, lobby, whatever in this facility. Going back to one of my passions, my love is art. We have a huge population of African American artists not just in the city of High Point, but in the entire state. A lot of these artists I've been following for years. Some of you may remember I had an art gallery, started out at my house, that quickly grew, so I came to Washington Street. So I want to go back to bringing this level of art back to our city. And of course, offering art classes for individuals, youth, adults, everyone. We want to bring in traveling exhibits. There's an exhibit traveling now that's currently over at A&T. I would love to bring that exhibit to High Point. Partnerships. I have formed quite a few partnerships with different organizations over the years. What we would like to do is really take it up a couple of notches. So in order to do that, we will need a facility. One partnership has been the High Point Museum. We've done collaborate on projects for years. We're already talking about the projects that we want to do for February and June of next year. So this will really, having our own facility will really benefit both organizations. The Mendenhall Homestead in Jamestown, same thing, another partnership. We just need the right venue to present these programs, entertainment, stories, educational pieces. The Charlotte Hawkins Museum down in Sedalia has ties to High Point. When Charlotte Hawkins was living, she would have programming at High Point Normal, which is now Penn Griffin School of the Arts. So we have that history tied to that museum. They have a brand new director. I've already met from her. And again, we have plans to do projects for next year together. North Carolina Museum of History. Earl Imes, we go way back. I have brought him into High Point several times for different projects that we've done. And again, these are emails from these people. They're still in support of this culture center because they see the big picture of what High Point can do for this area all the way up to the state, and we can go beyond that to a national level. Now, I know it's been a few months, and it seemed like this part of the project, well, it did just come to a halt because we're looking for land and also, you know, investors, donors. That part of the elites came to a stop, but we kept moving. We did not stop for us what we were presenting to the community. Part of the unveiling at Washington Terrace Park for the historical marker, that was the official launch for the African American Heritage Trail. Myself, along with the Washington Street Preservation Society, Visit High Point, and the High Point Museum, we all took part in this project to officially launch it just last month. This trail will also be part of the North Carolina Heritage Trail. And then to put the icing on the cake, the unveiling that we just had at Blair Park on Friday is part of the Civil Rights Trail. That will tie into our Heritage Trail here in High Point. So we're going to be tied in with the state for as heritage trails. So, and somewhere along the way, we would love to have a trolley to you know, do the tours for these trails. And this trail is going to expand as far as South Main Street, all the way out to the Sandy Ridge area, because African Americans have history in that area as well. So again, partnerships with different organizations that I've already cultivated over the years. We're just ready to take it to another level. Another partnership, threw it out there in the atmosphere a few years ago. The National Black Theater Festival that comes to Winston-Salem every other year, founded in 1989. This year alone, they estimated 60,000 people to come through that festival in 1 week. Yaleeks tapped into that festival this year. There's a cultural organization in Winston-Salem that tied in with the festival to do a heritage tour of the Triad area, High Point, Greensboro, Winston-Salem. Well, They started out as Winston-Salem, Greensboro. But when I saw my friend Cheryl, who was the founder of this organization's email, she left off High Point. I'm like, oh, let me call her. We got a problem here. And I just threw out one tour that we could quickly put together to be part of this festival. And that was the tour of the John Coltrane. They brought their tour group over. They toured the house quickly because they was pressed for time, because she saw the value in adding this piece to that tour. They was willing to back off with the Greensboro location, but they got a little offended, so she had to throw them back in. That's the kind of move we was ready to make. But anyway, they came in, they toured the Coltrane house, went downtown to the corner here, took pictures of the statue, rode through the campus of Penn Griffin, and then they went on into Greensboro. We would love to have this facility almost done the next time this festival come in, if not done, so we can bring in those visitors to High Point, the tourism to High Point, the plays to High Point, the celebrities to High Point. So we're looking to really expand on this partnership. Again, our cultural center will have the size of the National Museum in Richmond, Virginia, but the biggest one is in Washington, D.C. Size-wise, it will be along the lines with the Harvey Gantt in Charlotte. But the concept that we will offer is completely different from these other culture centers. The newest culture center will officially open in January of next year in Charleston, South Carolina. That's the International African American Museum. So culture centers are still popping up, even during this shaky time of recession and the cost of everything going up. Culture centers are still moving and being formed across the country. So High Point can be that spot between Richmond and Charleston. Again, size-wise, about the same, but the content is totally different from what we will be offering. That will make a niche for us. Now, this is the potential site that we're looking at for now for the Culture Center, is to be beside the High Point Museum. The museum, a master plan was created a few years ago, and the city of High Point started acquiring properties for that expansion. 3 properties were purchased. One was not, and it was recently sold. But our ask for this project, for this site, is to have those lots donated to us, and also we will have an ask for some of the American Relief Funds, which the city still has, and that's still on the table. In this ask, it will be for land and funds to acquire additional properties, because this project needs at least 5 acres of land. That will be a perfect location, perfect partnerships with other organizations around the museum. It will, again, going back to Edith and her staff at the museum, we've been collaborating on projects for years. This will really give us something to work with. Across the street on Geyer is one side of High Point University. They will benefit from a culture center being there with the museum. And then across the street is Andrews High School. I would love to work with that school. Bring those students in. This project will offer jobs. The students can have part-time jobs, community service. So it's a win-win for everyone. And it's the location right there at the new front door of High Point. Now, going back several slides, another reason for Yaleeks to be in that location is this right here. We're right there at the Greenway. We can do so much with that greenway. It's already busy with people jogging, walking, running. Just imagine enhancing that with beautification, artwork, large outdoor sculptures, and then having a festival a couple of times a year, a spring festival, a fall festival, with tents lined up along that walkway. That will be another huge win for that area and for all parties involved. It's common for museums to be beside each other. It's common for more than one museum to be in a city. You go to Raleigh, Charlotte, they have museums right across the street from each other. Have more than one museum. Right now we have two, with the High Point Museum and the Children's Museum. Let's throw in the Culture Center as well. Greensboro has the Civil Rights Museum, a History Museum, a Children's Museum. High Point, we need one more. This is the landscape, the exterior of the High Point Museum from the Lexington Street view and the McGuinn side. By Uleaks looking to move in this location, that will mean we will have to redesign our renderings for the building. That's no problem for us. You know, we can do that. But the size and the content, the stories will still be the same, so a redesign is no problem. Samet Corporation is still on board. Johnny Seegers had an unexpected meeting, so he wasn't able to come this morning. It is no problem. So a redesign will be no issue, but I already have something in mind that will complement the museum. So it'll be a perfect look, and that's it. This is the exterior of the Black Student Union Center over at A&T. I was over there a couple of months ago meeting with some students, and when I left out, it was dark. That was the most beautiful building I have seen in a long time. Didn't realize that Uleaks may be looking at a different location, and the exterior will have to be something that will complement the museum. This would be a perfect look, this style of architect. It will complement the grounds of the museum and the structure itself. So again, a redesign is no problem. Why have a culture center? It can be the conduit to bridge that gap of cultural differences, combat racism, and strengthen the commitments to social justice. Provide opportunities for people in the social and active civic life to experience arts and culture. Bring different people together and cultures to help appreciate each other and their diversity. Huge investment for High Point. It's a win-win all the way around. And to be honest, and I feel this confident, wherever Uleak is built in this city, we're bringing a lot to the table. It's a huge investment. This is what we're offering the city of High Point. Also, you guys are branding the city. You can't brand a city without the cultural piece. We have that. We can present this in a way that no other person, entity, organization can do in this city. We have what you need. Economic growth, tourism. I just mentioned how many folks are coming through the festival for Winston-Salem. We can have that here as well. Being in this location can create a cultural district if we want to expand that whole block. That's just something I'm throwing out there, but I can see that being done. Public purpose project, and again, anywhere that Uleaks is built in this city is going to help with revitalization. I have that much confidence and faith in this project. One of my favorite sayings, that I hear from Nito Cobain all the time is faithful courage. I have that. And we have that with this project. I would like to share something with you guys, if you don't mind. One of my most valuable pieces, which will be in this culture center.
Oh, wow. Who is that, Phyllis?
She was a domestic worker for one of our early mayors. Ulix has been sharing our history I've been at this for 14 years. October was my anniversary. 14 years that I've been doing this in this city. I have connected with people from all around the city, black, white, all in between. Black, white, all in between, sharing their history. Black and white. Because they see this vision. They support this vision. They want to be part of this vision. Like I said, that piece of valuable history came from a white family here in High Point because they wanted to be in this story. That's just one piece that I don't even think the High Point Museum have that represents black people here in High Point. This type of stuff is in this city. People are wanting it to be displayed, shown, tell the stories in the right facility. This is the piece that High Point is missing. So that's all I have to say. I do have one of my board members here, Mr. Lavelle McMichaels. So that's it for me.
Wonderful, thank you so much. Always love the presentation. Mayor Pro Tem, any questions, comments from you?
No.
Councilmember Jefferson? It's great. I mean, you've made a great presentation. I'm assuming our next step, we can just give it to staff to have them start investigating.
We've done some investigation.
Okay.
If you'd like to put the map back up, we can talk a little bit about
Sure.
the properties that are
Good,
there.
great, thank you.
And we can do some further investigation.
Mr. Chairman, this is Councilman Holmes.
Yes, sir, go ahead.
I've had some offline discussions with Ms. Bridges, and I know that Pastor McMichael is there as well. But I think they've put together a really strong board to. Us confidence that they're taking the right steps towards developing this project.
Absolutely, thank you, sir. And Michael, we're trying to get a map up so that we can have some input from staff. Can you see that, Councilmember Holmes?
Okay. Yeah. So just for some history at the museum. That's funny. Nobody else. So just so you know, the museum prior to, the city took over the museum as a city department in 2009. Some of the properties that were acquired prior to 2009 were acquired through donated funds. So if we just look at the map, the property there just to the north on McGuinn, 1613, that's that first yellow star, was purchased in 2004 with a combination of funds from the High Point Historical Society and the city. And then that next property that isn't starred, that's 1615 McGuinn, is privately owned. Our right-of-way agent has had conversations with that property owner for a number of years. They know that that the city would be interested in that property were it to come available, but at this point, that's a private property that has not been, and the owner has not indicated that they are willing or ready to sell. The next property there is 1617 McGuinn, which was purchased in 2007 by the Hayden Harmon Foundation on behalf of the museum. So, and then the next property at the corner is 1420 Bragg, which was purchased in 2008 by a combination of funds of the Hayden Harmon Foundation, the city, and the Historic Society. So there is, there is some combined interest in those properties, and feel like we would need to get the entities that paid for those properties on board with this, and I know Ms. Bridges has had some conversations, but I just wanted to put that out there as another layer to this. If we look at the properties on Bragg Avenue, that next property where your leaks is over is 1420. You may recall that we spoke to the city council about acquiring that when we found out earlier in February of this year that it would be coming on the market. The city did an appraisal on that property, and it was appraised at $210,000 at that time. It sold for $285,000 in May. The city, did not. We never could get the property owner to negotiate with us on that one. The property next to that is 1418, and that one is still privately owned, and we've had conversations with, actually 1418 and 1416, those two houses. We've had conversations with both those property owners. The one at 1418, it changed ownership, but it's still within the same family earlier this year as well. And then the two other properties there on Bragg that are vacant, wooded lots, are owned by the apartment complex that's there that faces Lexington. To my knowledge, there hasn't been any conversation about acquiring either of those properties. But this whole acquiring of properties, the idea started obviously back before the city took control of the museum back in 2009. There was a master plan done of the whole site in 2012 by the city and the Historic Society, which looked at what could be done on that entire site as far as creating a larger museum footprint, I guess, and what different cultural amenities could be put there. So just to put that out there, that there has been work done on this site, and that we'd like the museum and certainly the other invested entities to be a part of whatever moves forward at this point.
So Eric, would all that together that you're talking about, would that equal 5 acres? Would that be enough acreage?
I don't know
Okay.
until we know what's really proposed.
Okay.
Until we have drawings and renderings about what would be proposed.
Okay, so the 3 starred on McGuinn, and then adding that, well, I guess it has the 176665, the one property, and then the 3 properties on Bragg. Do you know how many acreage all that would be?
I did not look up the acreage.
Okay.
I apologize.
Do you know, Phyllis? by any
The
chance?
the Salmon Corporation, we're gonna look to see
Okay.
if that was gonna give us the 5 that's needed. I have spoken with Edith, and she pulled in Mary Sizemore, since they are under the library. And I was aware of who the other organizations were that purchased those lots. And so far, they don't have an issue with those properties being donated. It's just a matter of coming to the table, giving more details, and making sure there isn't going to be any kind of conflict with what the museum may want to do now, because, again, this was planned out several years ago.
Right.
And I assume our next step is to pursue those properties and see what options we have with them. Do we need to wait for a rendering for that, or can we do that simultaneously?
I think we could certainly look, make contact with the property owners independently of a rendering, but I think a rendering would be a necessary step about what the footprint is, and looking at the topography to make, just to make sure that could be, that could happen on that site.
Sure it works, okay.
And certainly having clarity on which properties. So, what the red box, what is the red box for? Is that?
Oh, that was, they just showed up when I was doing a screenshot on that.
Okay.
Okay.
Those 2 lots, Those two lots that are connected with the apartments there, that wooded area, if we look to get those two lots as well, that should give us our 5. But again, the Samet Corporation is going to confirm all that.
Well, I would say that's probably our next step is to get a rendering from Samet and see how they can, what they can do to make this work. And then simultaneously, we'll go through the city and see about options for those properties. Does that sound like a good next step? And you've obviously keep being in contact with each other.
Chairman Hudson, a couple thoughts. This is Councilman Jefferson. So, in looking at this, I think a number of questions and thoughts come to mind. So, I am curious what the 2012 master plan said, and I think one of our next steps has to be looking at that master plan and it being discussed here in committee meeting. I think if there was a master plan with those sites in mind, what the master plan say. Also, to the point made by our assistant city manager about speaking with the folks who helped us acquire some of these other properties here, and what was the intent that they had, the purpose and reason for acquiring those properties. I do think that is important. I've heard that it needs to be at least 5 acres, but we don't even know what acreage size all these lots are. For all we know, we could need 4 more lots. So I'm curious about that part. I'm very curious about that. I think also looking at where you are putting the lots, the museum faces Lexington, which is mostly bordered by single-family houses, but in many ways is a corridor, and it's understood if something's on Lexington, it's a corridor that you may see residential or commercial. Things facing Bragg and touching that Bragg side immediately become a little more into proximity with families and homes that are right there. So all of that, I imagine, is outside of those apartments is zoned for single-family residential. So I am curious what community perceptions and feelings of the folks who live right there on Bragg are. Not that I think they'd be against it, but that's a part of due diligence, is that if you're going to put something of that size, that's going to take up that many acres and change the character of that neighborhood, hearing from that community is going to be important. And then some of what we discussed the last time we looked at the last property, I recall us having this discussion for another property that Ms. Bridges wanted for the museum. We talked about, when we do property conveyances, a big part that goes into that is how much private funding or funding from other sources have been received. So I do think that's going to be a part of the consideration. I think our most recent conveyance was to D-Up on Washington Street. And D-Up at that point had secured in hand millions of dollars. I can't remember the total amount, but they had secured at least several millions. And they also owned several other properties, I think, right there in that stint. So I do know between that conveyance, I think the conveyances that we referenced before were Macedonia and was it the YMCA we referenced? I don't know if that was one, maybe. But we looked at some of those other examples. So I do know, going back to that, some of those reasons why it was conveyed are going to be some things that are going to be considered. So that's not to say any of those are things to say this. Ultimately, Chairman, to your point, what are the next steps? All those are considerations. So whether we choose to make them all next steps we discuss in the next meeting, whether we choose to make a timeline to look at all those considerations over a 6-month, 12-month, 18-month period, or whether we just choose to know those are considerations we're going to talk about at some point and get to it when we get to it, that's fine too. I guess I want to manage expectations here. That's part of me wanting to be transparent and honest. I know that, yes, we're going to look at renderings, but at some point, we're going to come up and say, well, what the community say. Then once we hear from the community, at some point, we're going to say, do you have other funding? And then we're going to say, well, at some point, what the 2012 master plan say? And then we're going to say, well, at some point, what the other property, we're going to go through all that. We might as well know what all the considerations are, because some stuff you can be looking at the same time.
Yeah.
So I do think some of this, that city staff is going to look into. I do think there's probably some things, Ms. Bridges, you and your organization could probably look into as well.
Yes, we do still have monies on the table for this project, and we are in talks now with a potential investor who's looking to bring others on board for this project. So again, I did keep in mind everything that was said from the previous conversation, so we're still plugging away. It's just trying to figure out what's best for everyone and also for the area. We did take into consideration for us a structure at large being in a residential area, but look across the street at High Point University. A lot of that was residential before they expanded. And we will have that exterior look to, it will be suitable for their area. And we will do what we need to do in order to make it not be so overwhelming and powerful, and soften it up with landscaping, so it's more transitional, more soothing, appealing to the eye for that corner.
If I may just add something. So, I mean, we love your idea, and actually, you know, that is going to be an entryway into the city. I do think at this point, I mean, my personal view is, instead of rushing to try to get a rendering, is for city staff to, number one, see if the area is 5 acres, if the area is enough. And then I think we may need to do a traffic study, because there's, you know, to see how is the parking going to work? How is the roadway? Because, you know, Lexington, I don't know what's in our long-term plans for Lexington as we grow, because, you know, right now it's just a 2-lane road, but there may need to be a traffic study conducted to just even make sure if something that size would be compatible, I would think. Is that something you think?
We'll determine if that's needed.
Right, to just make sure before you know, do another rendering, you know, just to kind of make sure, do we have 5 acres that could possibly be purchased and conveyed? And then what does the traffic study say?
And certainly, potentially, it might need to be rezoned, because that most
Okay,
likely
okay.
is single-family residential, so the transportation and planning can speak to that as well, to do a little bit more
Okay.
due diligence on that side of it, too.
And I will say that all of those parts that we're talking about will rely on a rendering. So until we do have a rendering, we can't do a traffic study. So, I mean, the rendering is step one.
Yeah.
And really, it's step one, even for you to say, yes, we need this property. So at least a rough rendering is needed at this point. So I would say those 2 steps are immediate steps.
Yeah, and in some ways, that's, I mean, it's kind of a chicken and egg situation, I imagine, because knowing what constraints you have in terms of land mass are going to impact how you do your rendering, I imagine. Just like being able to know what the rendering calls for will tell you how much land you need. So it is a little chicken and egg. Thinking back to the last time we had this conversation about the property over near Washington and Hoskins, we had the conversation, and I think our legal department spent probably months looking into all that, and then we ended up finding out that the acreage never matched, I think, what you were looking for here with that site. So I will say that's one of those big things that needs to be figured out, because if we look at all these lots and it doesn't fit the acreage of what you have in mind, I mean, that's a part of early planning and discussions that'll go not only into your rendering work, but it'll go into a lot of other stuff. I think some other things that now are bubbling up to the surface now that I'm thinking about it, because you also mentioned American relief funds from ARPA, so the
Yes.
American Rescue Plan. Just as an FYI, I do know the city, in terms of what we've got, just through city priorities and some things that have been proposed to the city, everything has to be consistent with what the ARPA funds guidelines say we can spend it on. So I would certainly encourage Ms. Bridges, you and the board, to definitely check that out. There's some good stuff in there that for us to hear what this project's doing, it's got to match what's in the guidelines of the relief plan funds. So that I think is going to be a big piece. I think another thing we have to be thinking about here too, team, is just full-on timeline of this. I mean, we're not going to have anything narrowed down in terms of timeline The reason why I mentioned it is that there's a shot clock on some of the dollars with ARPA. And being that there is a shot clock on that, what would that mean in terms of time it'll take to acquire properties, and time it'll take to really flesh out this plan that we've been talking about? So these are all the sort of things I think we need to be talking about. I would love to sit here and just say, I love the presentation, cool, let's get a rendering, but I think my big thing here is I just go for honesty, and managing expectations about what we would need to do before we could ever get to anything really concrete. I think the other big thing too, in terms of HPU, just because it was referenced, HPU raised all their own money. And that's a big part of it, that everything HPU did was HPU's money raised. And so whenever the city gets in bed and using taxpayer dollars to buy stuff, there's just gonna be different. It's not apples to apples at that point. So I'm excited and thrilled at the idea of what this could be. I actually am really glad that we're looking at this site that's near the museum, just because I think it gives a little more continuity. You've got the High Point Museum, and then if you can bring this to it, then it does come closer together. Just as food for thought, maybe for the record, Ms. Bridges, if we went down this path, and one of the options that makes it most feasible would be that what you're looking to do could be an extension of the High Point Museum, where we build off the High Point Museum and for all this to come together. Would that be something that's open to your organization?
Sure, I see that. That's why I feel like this is the perfect location. And as I mentioned earlier, this whole block can be that cultural district that we don't have. That can be done later on in phases.
This is Councilman Holmes. Councilman Jefferson, I think as I see it with the presentation, I think that as Ms. Bridges is looking to assemble close to the museum, that there was some implied integration with the museum, making it a cultural destination. And so the idea that there's a possibility of the expansion of the museum to include your leaks, I think that was something that you had also anticipated as well, Ms. Bridges?
Yes. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Michael, thank you for that. Let me be a little more direct. So if this is an extension of the museum, who's owning what, I think is going to be a question. And
Certainly.
So Mike, thanks for that. I think, Ms. Bridges, that'll be a part of the conversation too. In terms of if it's going to be an extension of the museum, the city owns the museum, but y'all leaks, it sounds like, would be owned by your nonprofit.
Right.
And so that would be another part of the conversation that in terms of feasibility here, and who's putting what funds towards what, I mean, all that just goes into play, so.
Yeah. Maybe I'm just wrong about how I'm seeing this and thinking it's more just neighbors being there beside each other and just sharing information that they have. Museum under city, your leaks, totally different ownership, entity, how we're ran and operated. And I may be wrong, but that's how I see that. I don't see any conflict, because again, we're bringing something to the table that the museum can use. They have things that they already have that we can use. It's just a matter of collaborating on different projects, and having like one big campus where we're just all on there together. We will be charging an admission fee, which is comparable to other venues, but when people come to visit, you're getting like a 2 for the price of 1. You come into Leeds, you may have to pay a little bit to come in, but then you walk across the campus there to the museum, more history, more programming, which is free. That's a lot of valuable information that people are getting for little or nothing. And it's all on those grounds. So it makes business sense to me. It makes perfectly good partnerships. So, but far as ownership, can be 2 different entities, different ownerships, and it still work.
I think we're at the point now where we're trying to answer questions that haven't been asked yet, so. We'll stay at stage 1. This is a great presentation. Let's see where it goes. A rendering from Samet, if you'd like to have them investigate what if we connected the two. You know, that's perfectly legitimate at this point, so.
Yeah.
Let's just keep the discussion on the table, and we'll have staff work directly with you at this point and
Okay,
see where we can, see what our options are.
okay.
Anything further?
No, I just maintain, thinking about everything that has to go into it. I know what it is to be in community, and folks feel like you kick a can down the road and keep kicking it down the road and keep kicking it down the road. I don't want us to get into a situation where every meeting we come in and only bite one chunk of an apple, and you don't know how big the apple is. So I say it like it's managing expectations, so that way we don't grow weary and well-doing. Like, this is a great effort, but you gotta know how big the apple is. And far be it, you're right, these are questions that, at some, like, no, they don't have to be answered today, but they have to be answered at some point. And some of these questions take longer than 1 month to get them answered. So if we go meeting to meeting saying, well, look, we'll deal with it when it comes and cross that bridge when we get there, we're looking at an effort that this ain't gonna come to fruition for another 10 years, just quite frankly, at that pace. So I think knowing upfront what you have and being able to be solid about what you gotta go after, that's what I just advocate for. I'm pragmatic in that way.
So look,
This Councilman Holmes, I actually concur with Councilman Jefferson. I think that one of the next steps after this is for us to complete, from both sides of this project, a full scope profile of all the needs, a needs assessment and a gap analysis of what we don't have. Try to answer as many of these questions concurrently as we can. And so that way we cut down on the time frame between the discovery period, between what we need, and then we can establish a full timeline for the project. So, I agree with Councilman Jefferson there. I think the faster we know and the more we know, the easier that this project will be.
this is LaBelle McMichael, and to Councilman Holmes' point, there's some work that the board is doing, and to speak to Councilman Holmes' comment about the competency of the board, a lot of these questions that Councilman Jefferson just brought up, we're working on, and this presentation is much bigger, but just for the purposes of this meeting, we condensed it just to get through some of the preliminary, getting it on the record. So we appreciate all of those questions and want to make sure that we're working concurrently to make sure that the questions are not only answered, but that we're able to find the necessary partnerships, funding to make sure that this project happens. And that's what we're looking for in terms of ULEAQ's and its ability to bring something to the city without taking a long time because of the sensitivity of this type of history. As people pass away, that history passes away with them. So in order to gather this data from a city perspective and from the residents that are still here that have these documents and memorabilia, we want to make sure that we continue to move this project forward. So one of the reasons why I came on board with Ms. Bridges was to make sure that some project management and some tasks are elevated to a point where they're able to be constructed so that it can meet the city, not only the city standards, but the community standards, because African-American history is a part of High Point's history. And while it's not separated, we definitely want to see how we bridge those two together. So thank you for the opportunity to speak to those points.
Yeah, and now to that, Reverend McMichael, to be clear, I forgive me if my questions came off as grilling. I'm really raising a reality of, let's be clear on what we've got to get done. Truth be told, we could like all come in here and be like really nice about conversations and be like, yeah, let's just do, yeah. But then, like you said before, we don't recognize all the other stuff, and then we end up having this really exacerbated timeline. History starts going through the fingers, and then we're 18 months into this thing, and folks are like, well, city council is just stalling. I would want it to be said, while I'm a member of this body, that we're upfront about how much needs to get done. And if we're gonna have any type of a timeline that can seem a little more amenable, then we've got to be taking and walking on some of these steps congruently at the same time. So to Michael's point, if we can know it all, and I think there needs to be some more conversations between y'all organization and city staff to kind of say, here's the full gamut. And we talked about this at our retreat last week. Whenever any business or organization says, I've got an idea and a new project, there's a whole lot of steps to navigate. And it's not any organization's fault for not knowing those steps, because until you navigated it, you just never had to navigate it. And we see it in our downtown where downtown businesses are literally coming, trying to get stuff done. They get told, you gotta do this one thing. Then they do that one thing. It's like, oh yeah, you gotta do this one thing. And that business literally says, if you'd have told me A to Z, I could have done A, G, Q, T, X, all at the same exact time, but no one told me A to Z. They just said, yeah, just take care of A and we'll see you next week, right? It's like, take 2 of these and see me in a month. That's not how we need to be doing it. We need to be saying, hey, you got the full gamut of stuff. Let's be honest about your full gamut of stuff, so then we can go at it together. So it's certainly not real, and I think it's trying to be clear, because whatever questions we ask right here, when it gets to that full body of council, as peachy keen as we sound here, there's gonna be plenty of folks asking all types of questions about that when it gets to that full body. And at that point, we'll want to have known, when we had this conversation, that we talked about the full thing, so that way we can jump into it all together, A to Z, and be solid on, like, what does it take to really move this thing down the road?
Is there a
Can I make
particular
one more
checklist?
comment real quick? So I've worked on several projects before where the organization and our city staff in planning and stuff have meetings together. Because I think instead of Samet creating a whole new rendering, because you already have one of what you wish your dream could be, is meet with some, maybe Samet and some of your board, meet with some of the city staff in planning, so that you're not like going back and forth and kind of figuring it out and have a game plan and then bring it back to council. Does that make sense to you, Greg and Eric?
I think there's a couple early questions that can be answered as far as size of properties and acquisition possibilities before you get into the weeds of all the steps. But those early, I don't call them triggers, need to be addressed first.
Okay.
And then the next step would be get out the checklist, sit down with planning, and start going through, is the zoning there, all those different pieces that Councilman Jefferson referenced. But yeah, we can help assist in that process.
Perfect. I was just going to ask for a
Where does it
checklist.
sit on the piece of property? It's not
Yeah, but
just.
they don't know where the property is. Right? Do they know where the property
If I
is?
ask the city, can I build a house on this property, they're gonna say, how big is the house gonna be? That's a basic starting question. That's
Or
what-
you may
that's
say,
what-
if you're gonna build a house, you may say, how big is the property gonna be? So I know how big my house is gonna be. I mean,
This is the kind of stuff that we don't need, this is not the city's business. We don't need to be taking time to tell them how to do what they're already doing. I mean, you all know what you're doing.
then why are we here?
Well, hold up. Chairman Hudson, respectfully, please don't frame it as that. We're not sitting here telling y'all how to do y'all's jobs. We're being upfront about the process that folks have to go through. And as a councilman, before I was a councilman, people complained to me plenty of times that sometimes as a city, we're a bureaucracy, and we say you do one thing, and then you do that, and then we say, well, you also gotta do this thing, and then we say, well, you gotta do this thing. It's the reason why permits just got better, because we got serious over the past 7 years about saying, let's give them the full thing and tell them how we can be flexible. So now we get people who do construct, who work hand in hand with staff, who may say, yeah, I was thinking of a 3,500 square foot thing, but if you tell me these are my constraints, I might be willing to adjust to 3,200 square feet, given all the information. So this isn't anyone trying to tell anyone how to do business. It's us trying to say, let's have conversations together, be collaborative, because truth be told, it's gonna come to that anyways. And I've had enough times of conversations in this committee that we all seem to be peachy keen, and they get back to council, and everyone who was peachy keen in here ain't peachy keen with full council, if I can just be honest. So I'm just honest about stuff, because I've been peachy keen here and peachy keen at full council. I'm trying to make sure we can get everything solid here, so that way when it gets to full council, we're solid.
Absolutely. And to that point, we would love to have a checklist, and I welcome this type of dialogue because it helps me to think more broadly in talking with the board to make sure that we're flexible and making the necessary adjustments that may need to be made or not, or flexibility that we need to ask the city. So if we can get with planning and development to make sure we get checklists so that when we're talking to the Samet Corporation, we can do that, and then make sure that we do some city meetings as recommended. That way, when we come back, we can have a more detailed plan and that we can solidify everything in presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
I understand everything that you guys are saying. I am flexible. I just want this project to come to fruition. when we start looking at this location, I spent hours in the middle of the night thinking, okay, if we have to downsize, what piece can I do without? I've already had these conversations up here.
We've
So-
also talked about multiple sites throughout the city to coincide with the trail. So we're like
Yeah,
thinking of
so-
all of this kind of stuff to make sure that even if the actual center is not the dream size, that it can still not lose the dream.
Right.
Right, absolutely.
Because even with this location, it would just bring the trail to this location, because we got these two historical pieces, these centers right here together. So even if it means downsizing, and I lose a classroom or whatever, there's no problem with me. I just know the value in having this facility in this city. And however we can come together to make it happen, let's just do it. Some of you know me. I don't do a lot of this talking. When it's time to move and do something, you just tell me what it is, and it's done. I may be ahead of you already. We just need, again, time is not on my side. I may look 21, but I'm not. I'm not gonna be here another 40, 50 years. I want this built up and going and be able to sit back and enjoy it for a few years. So yeah, time is of the essence, and money, because I'm in construction. Price of everything is still going up. So I understand everything about this project. So whatever we got to do to make it happen, to make it move, let's just do it. But again, it don't matter where in the city. We bringing our A game.
Then, I mean, you're in conversation already, so
Yeah.
I'll say I'll leave it in your hands. I know you have direction. Anything further?
Do we know when we want to hear another update in this committee meeting, Chairman Hudson?
I'm not sure what their timeline would be either, but we can
Well, I
certainly
think we
set
can
it up.
definitely very quickly share the acreage, and then share the master plan that was done in 2012.
Yeah.
And, you know, hopefully we can meet with Ms. Bridges and her folks and come back at the next, probably January.
So January.
January would be the best.
There you go.
Go. Okay.
And I want to not be remiss to say, certainly identification of the parcels, the ones that are privately owned, because that's a big factor for the city to be able to, you know, the city-owned ones are one thing, but identification of the parcels that they're looking at that are privately owned. And any conveyance that the city were to do of land would have a public purpose, that have a clause in the deed that would always have to be used for a public purpose. And if it's no longer used for that, it would revert back to the city. And the way we handled it with DUP were some triggers that they had to meet before the land would even convey to them. So just want to throw that out. When you're looking at privately owned property, that's always a different hurdle than just the 3 parcels that are currently city-owned.
Yeah, so if we can make sure they know what those triggers are too, I think that would be really helpful. And in January, if we can get an update on this stuff we just talked about, I think that would be great.
Councilmember Holmes, anything further from you?
He had to jump on.
I do not, Mr. Chairman. I think this has been a fruitful discussion, and I think we have some good actions to take away. I want to make sure that we are working together on both sides of it to make sure that everyone has what they need.
Absolutely. Thank you for attending today as well. If there's nothing further, we're adjourned. Thank you all.